The courtroom in Montgomery, Alabama fell silent as Tyler Anderson stepped through the heavy oak doors. The rainbow bracelet on his wrist caught the harsh fluorescent light, a quiet declaration in a room full of narrowed eyes. His fitted jeans and vibrant button-up shirt stood out against the muted tones of the courtroom, like a cardinal among sparrows. Behind his confident stride lay years of painful memories growing up gay in small-town Alabama. The whispers, the slurs, the fists that followed, before Tyler could take another step. Officer Jenkins barked across the room, his fingers stabbing the air. "That's him, the thief who stole files from the county office." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Gasps rippled through the crowd as whispers spread like wildfire. District Attorney Richard Simmons rose slowly from his seat, a predatory smile spreading across his weathered face. Their eyes met briefly, a flicker of recognition passed between them. 10 years earlier, Tyler had worked under Richard as an intern, witnessing firsthand how the man bent justice to his will. "We don't need people like you cluttering this courtroom." Richard's voice cut sharp as glass. "Drag him forward and search him now." The words landed heavy, not just an accusation, but a public sentence. All eyes turned to Tyler, judging, condemning, waiting for humiliation to unfold. Two officers closed in, each step echoing against the marble floor. One yanked Tyler's messenger bag away, while the other forced his arms apart. The sting of injustice filled the air, and for a moment it felt like the verdict had already been delivered. "I haven't stolen anything," Tyler stated, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "You're making a serious mistake." Cold laughter broke out from the gallery. Richard leaned forward with a sneer. "Mistake, the only mistake here is letting someone like you walk free." The emphasis on "someone like you" carried the weight of decades of discrimination. They pushed Tyler to the center of the courtroom, right before the judge's bench. Hands ran roughly down his sides, fingers tugging at his sleeves, invading his personal space with deliberate disrespect. A murmur rolled through the crowd, not of pity, but of judgment. "Look at how he dresses. Of course he looks like a thief," one woman whispered loud enough for all to hear. Another man chuckled. "He fits the profile, doesn't he, Mama?" And Tyler stood frozen, every touch burning with shame, every word slicing deeper. Yet deep in his eyes burned not fear, but determination. This moment, this public humiliation, was precisely what he had come for. Have you ever been judged before you could speak? Before you could defend yourself? Subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that reveal the power of standing tall when the world tries to bring you to your knees. Tyler's eyes locked with Richard's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This wasn't their first encounter. A decade earlier, Tyler had watched from the corner of an office as Richard buried evidence that would have exonerated a young gay man accused of assault. That moment had changed the trajectory of Tyler's life, setting him on a path that led straight back to this courtroom, to this confrontation that had been years in the making. The courtroom lights cast harsh shadows across Richard's face, accentuating the deep lines carved by years of wielding power without accountability. The mahogany panels behind him seemed to absorb the tension in the room, storing it like energy waiting to be released. The American flag hung limply in the corner, its promise of equal justice under law a silent witness to the scene unfolding beneath it. "I know exactly what you're doing, Richard," Tyler said quietly, using the district attorney's first name with deliberate familiarity, a small rebellion against the power dynamic Richard sought to establish. "And you know exactly who I am." The words carried layers of meaning only Richard could fully comprehend, a reminder of shared history and of secrets that perhaps weren't as buried as Richard believed. Color drained from Richard's face, beginning at his hairline and receding like a tide, before anger quickly replaced it, flooding his features with crimson. "Search him thoroughly," Richard commanded the officers, regaining his composure with visible effort. His voice took on a performative formality as he added, "Under the Fourth Amendment, we have reasonable suspicion that he's concealing stolen documents relating to active cases." The irony of Richard invoking constitutional rights while trampling over them wasn't lost on Tyler. whose law degree and years of training had prepared him for precisely this moment. Officer Jenkins forced Tyler to spread his legs wider, patting down his waist with deliberate roughness, as if he were nothing but contraband in human form. The second officer, Peterson, younger and visibly uncomfortable with the spectacle, emptied Tyler's bag onto a nearby table, rifling through his personal items with theatrical disgust. A notebook, pens, a protein bar, a small bottle of hand sanitizer, each item inspected as if it might transform into evidence of wrongdoing before their eyes. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each second of this public degradation. Through the tall windows, Alabama sunshine streamed in, oblivious to the injustice it illuminated. Outside, daily life continued, cars passing, pedestrians walking while inside. A man's dignity was being systematically dismantled for the crime of being different in a place that demanded conformity. "Write it in the record!" Richard's voice boomed across the room, addressing the court stenographer whose fingers hesitated momentarily over her machine. "Subject resists, subject obstructs justice, and demonstrates clear signs of guilt." He paused for effect, then added cruelly, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "This is what criminals look like in our community, flaunting their lifestyle, thinking they're above our laws and values." His emphasis on lifestyle carried unmistakable venom. A dog whistled to the conservative courtroom. The word lifestyle echoed in the chamber, branding Tyler as something other, something less than human. Several people in the gallery nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the comfortable prejudice of those who never question the systems that benefit them. An elderly man in the front row muttered, "Amen to that." Loud enough for those nearby to hear, the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped forward. It was as if the entire courtroom had agreed to erase Tyler's humanity, to watch him crumble and call it justice. In the back row, a 12-year-old boy named Mason tugged at his mother's sleeve, his glasses slightly too big for his face, his eyes wide with the innocent clarity that adults often lose. "Mom, why are they treating him like that just because he's different?" he whispered, his voice carrying further than he intended in the acoustic chamber of the courtroom. His mother, Sarah Williams, a civil rights attorney who had battled discrimination cases for years, placed a protective arm around her son's shoulders. Her sleek blazer and professional demeanor couldn't hide the flash of anger in her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. Sarah began to rise, legal objection forming on her lips, her briefcase clutched tightly in manicured hands. But Tyler caught her eye across the room and subtly shook his head, the smallest movement that only she would notice. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. This wasn't just about one moment of humiliation, it was about exposing a pattern, a system that had crushed countless lives before his. It required patience, strategy, and the willingness to endure what others had suffered without recourse. "Your kind will always end up here," Richard continued, emboldened by the silent support of the room, by the nods and murmurs that reinforced his position of authority. No future, no respect, just petty crimes and perversion. He spat the last word like a curse, revealing the true nature of his accusation, not theft of documents, but the theft of normalcy, the crime of existing outside the narrow boundaries of what Richard deemed acceptable. Tyler's body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of restraint, from the effort of not responding as every instinct demanded. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. Beneath his shirt, concealed by fabric chosen specifically for this purpose, a small recording device captured every word, every slur, every violation of procedure. The red light blinked silently, collecting evidence with each passing second. This wasn't the first time Richard had publicly humiliated a defendant based on prejudice, but if Tyler's plan worked, it would be the last. Officer Peterson hesitated as he reached the bottom of Tyler's bag, finding nothing incriminating despite Richard's certainty. His young face showed confusion, perhaps the first seeds of doubt. "Sir, there's nothing here that matches the description of the missing files," he said, his voice carrying a question beneath the statement. Richard waved dismissively. Check his pockets. His shoes, he's hiding something, they always are. The order carried an implicit message: find something, anything, or create it if necessary. The justice Richard sought had nothing to do with truth and everything to do with confirming his own biases. The tension in the courtroom built with each passing moment, a pressure cooker of prejudice and power. Several spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the wooden benches creaking beneath them like a Greek chorus commenting on the unfolding drama. A journalist in the back row scribbled notes, sensing that something unusual was developing. The court reporter's fingers continued their steady rhythm, transcribing a record that would soon become evidence of a very different kind than Richard anticipated. Tyler's eyes moved briefly to Judge Carter, noting her growing discomfort with the proceedings. Recently appointed to the bench after years as a public defender, she represented a new generation of judicial thinking in a state known for its entrenched conservatism. Her presence was no accident. Tyler's team had timed this operation precisely to coincide with her rotation in this courtroom. Knowing her reputation for fairness would be crucial to what would follow. The justice system isn't just about laws written on paper or precedents cited in arguments. It's about the dignity with which those laws are applied to every person who enters its domain. When that dignity is stripped away, when prejudice replaces procedure, the system fails not just the individual before it, but the very principles upon which it claims to stand. In those moments, it takes extraordinary courage to endure humiliation in service of a greater justice that may seem impossibly distant. Richard circled Tyler like a vulture eyeing wounded prey, his Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Each step echoed through the courtroom, creating a soundtrack to the public spectacle he had orchestrated. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting prison bar shadows across Tyler's face. The air conditioning hummed softly, its cool efficiency contrasting with the heated emotions building within the human drama below. The defendant is suspected of stealing confidential files related to ongoing cases, Richard announced to the courtroom, his voice dripping with manufactured authority that came from years of unchallenged power. His hands gestured expansively, commanding attention like a conductor before an orchestra. Files that mysteriously disappeared after he was seen lurking around the county clerk's office just yesterday afternoon. The accusation hung in the air, substantiated by nothing but Richard's conviction that it must be true. Tyler stood his ground, shoulders square despite the humiliation that sought to bend him. His posture spoke of resilience formed in the crucible of past struggles, the high school locker room beatings, the college rejection letters with no explanations, the apartment applications mysteriously denied. I understand the Constitution of the United States guarantees me certain rights under the 5th and 14th Amendments, he stated clearly, each word precisely chosen and delivered with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the law, including due process and equal protection under the law, neither of which I'm currently receiving. Richard's laugh was sharp and dismissive, cutting through the tension like a knife through gossamer. It was the laugh of someone unaccustomed to having his authority questioned, especially by those he considered beneath him. Listen to him quoting laws he probably learned from some activist website or Rainbow Parade pamphlet. Several spectators chuckled, grateful for the permission to release their discomfort through mockery. Richard leaned in closer, invading Tyler's personal space with deliberate intimidation. His voice dropped to a stage whisper that nevertheless carried throughout the room, designed to humiliate while maintaining a veneer of professional conduct. Your preferences suggest a certain disregard for natural order. Is it really surprising that disregard extends to our laws as well? The deliberate conflation of Tyler's sexual orientation with criminal tendency sent a ripple of murmurs through the gallery. Some nodded in agreement, their prejudices validated by someone in authority. Others looked away uncomfortably, windows steaming slightly from their warm breath, complicit in their silence, unwilling to challenge the narrative but equally unwilling to openly endorse it. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter, as if Tyler might snatch it at any moment, while a middle-aged man in a business suit smirked behind his hand. In the back row, Mason's eyes widened with confusion and distress behind his two large glasses. The innocence of childhood confronted the ugly reality of adult prejudice, creating cognitive dissonance that demanded resolution. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve again, his voice carrying the distress of witnessing injustice for perhaps the first time. "That's not fair. You told me being different isn't wrong. You said the law protects everyone the same." Sarah squeezed her son's hand reassuringly, her wedding ring catching the light. Her eyes never left the confrontation playing out before them, analyzing it with the practiced eye of someone who had fought similar battles in countless courtrooms across the state. "It isn't wrong, honey. What's happening here is wrong, and that's exactly the problem." Her lawyer's instincts screamed to object, to intervene, to cite procedural violations and constitutional protections. The briefcase at her feet contained countless precedents she could invoke, arguments she had refined through years of civil rights litigation. But something in Tyler's composed demeanor made her hesitate, made her keep her legal ammunition in reserve. He seemed almost prepared, watching Richard's performance with the calculating gaze of someone waiting for a specific moment, like a chess player allowing his opponent to overextend before the decisive countermove. Officer Peterson continued his invasive search, pulling out Tyler's wallet and holding up his driver's license, as if it were evidence of wrongdoing rather than ordinary identification. The leather bifold opened to reveal the normal contents of a life credit cards, a health insurance card, a faded photograph of an elderly woman who might be a grandmother or mentor. "Anderson, Tyler J., residence in Birmingham. What business brings you to Montgomery County, other than theft?" The question carried an assumption of guilt that rendered any answer irrelevant. Tyler remained silent, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. The slight bulge beneath his shirt invisible to most captured every word, every procedural violation, every instance of bias that would later become evidence in a very different kind of proceeding. The small recording device was gathering ammunition not just against Richard, but against a system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for decades, ruining lives with the casual cruelty of someone who never faces consequences. A bead of sweat traced a path down Richard's temple as Tyler's continued composure began to unsettle him. The script wasn't playing out as expected. There should be fear by now, perhaps pleading, certainly some acknowledgement of Richard's power to destroy. Instead, he faced only calm dignity that somehow diminished his own authority with each passing moment. Richard's frustration grew with Tyler's composure, cracking the veneer of professional detachment. "Your silence only confirms your guilt," he snapped, his voice rising slightly, control slipping. He turned to Judge Elizabeth Carter, seeking the authority of the bench to validate his increasingly tenuous position. "Your Honor, I move to have the defendant remanded immediately pending formal charges. He presents a flight risk and a danger to ongoing investigations." Judge Carter, recently appointed and known for her commitment to judicial reform, observed the proceedings with increasing concern etched on her features. Her dark robe seemed to absorb the light around her as she leaned forward, fingers steepled before her. Unlike many of her colleagues, she had risen through public defense rather than prosecution, giving her a perspective Richard clearly hadn't anticipated. "Mr. Simmons, has the defendant been formally charged with any crime? Have you presented evidence beyond your verbal accusations?" Her tone was measured but pointed, poking holes in the spectacle Richard had tried to create. Richard's confidence faltered momentarily before he recovered, adjusting his tie as if it had suddenly become too tight. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor. This man matches the description of our suspect perfectly. We have an eyewitness who saw someone fitting his description near the records room yesterday." The vagueness of his claim hung in the air, its weakness apparent to everyone with legal training in the room. The description being, Judge Carter pressed, her dark eyes narrowing slightly as she leaned forward, her judicial robes shifting with the movement. The bench creaked softly under her weight, the sound amplified in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Richard hesitated, knowing what his next words would reveal about the true nature of his accusations. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, marking each second of his silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting unflattering shadows that seemed to age him before everyone's eyes. His hesitation spoke volumes, revealing the emptiness behind his accusations more effectively than any defense attorney could have managed. Sometimes the most powerful resistance isn't found in shouting back, but in standing firm, collecting evidence, and trusting that truth will eventually outweigh prejudice when the full story comes to light. The path to justice isn't always through dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's through strategic patience, through allowing systems of oppression to reveal themselves so completely that even those who benefit from them can no longer deny their existence. The description, being a man who doesn't belong in our community, Richard finally replied, the words hanging in the air like a confession of the true motivation behind his actions. Sunlight slanting through the high windows illuminated dust particles dancing between them, silent witnesses to this moment of unintended truth. Someone who flaunts traditional values and clearly has no respect for our institutions. His emphasis on our revealed the exclusionary vision of community that guided his prosecutorial discretion, a community defined not by geography or citizenship, but by conformity to his personal standards. Judge Carter's eyebrows rose slightly, the small movement conveying volumes of judicial skepticism. Her dark fingers tapped lightly on the bench, the sound barely audible yet somehow commanding complete attention. That hardly constitutes probable cause. Mr. Simmons, the rebuke was delivered with professional restraint, but the message was unmistakable. In my courtroom, we require evidence, not personal opinions about who belongs in Montgomery. The spectators shifted in their seats, the wooden benches creaking beneath them like a Greek chorus commenting on the drama. Some looked uncomfortable, confronted with the naked prejudice that usually hid behind procedural language and legal technicalities. Others appeared confused, their certainty about Tyler's guilt undermined by the judge's skepticism. Officer Peterson glanced at his partner, uncertainty written across his youthful features. Richard's face flushed with anger, red blotches appearing on his neck above his starched collar. Decades of unchallenged authority had left him ill-equipped to handle public contradiction, especially from a judge he considered too new, too progressive, too different from the old guard that had protected his methods for years. Arrest him now. We can sort the details at the station, he barked at the officers, desperation creeping into his voice like cracks in a facade. His hands clutched the prosecution table, knuckles white with tension. He could feel control of the situation slipping away. This public spectacle was supposed to be quick, humiliating, and without consequence, just like the dozens of others before it. The cases that never made headlines but destroyed lives nonetheless. Tyler took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs with purpose. The moment had arrived, the culmination of years of planning, months of investigation, weeks of preparation. The recording device had captured everything he needed. The witnesses were in place. The trap had been perfectly baited and sprung. With one controlled movement, he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small leather case embossed with the federal seal. The snap of it opening cut through Richard's commands like a blade through paper, silencing the room instantly. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Tyler stated clearly, his voice carrying throughout the now silent courtroom with quiet authority that needed no shouting to command attention. He raised the badge high for all to see, the gold catching the light like a beacon of accountability. Special Agent Tyler Anderson, Civil Rights Division. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Judge Carter's gavel slipped from her hand, clattering on the wooden bench before she recovered it. Officers Peterson and Jenkins were frozen in place, their faces draining of color like watercolor paintings left in the rain. In an instant, the man they had publicly humiliated transformed into federal authority none of them dared to challenge. The power dynamic that had defined the proceeding inverted completely, leaving Richard exposed and vulnerable in the spotlight he himself had created. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard sputtered, his face alternating between red and white in rapid succession, blood rushing to and from his features as shock battled with rage. His carefully constructed world was collapsing around him, years of unchecked power dissolving in seconds. This is outrageous, a setup. His voice cracked with the strain of comprehending his situation. Tyler stepped forward, the badge gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights as he returned it to his pocket. His posture changed subtly, the deliberately submissive stance replaced with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. For the past 6 months, the FBI has been investigating systematic discrimination in the Alabama judicial system following multiple complaints of rights violations based on race, gender, and sexual orientation. His voice carried the weight of federal authority, each word precisely enunciated to ensure the recording captured everything clearly. Today's demonstration was the final piece of evidence we needed. He set his messenger bag on the prosecutor's table and extracted a thick folder bound with red tape. The sound of papers sliding against each other filled the silence as he opened it. Inside are reports you falsified. Mr. Simmons, witness statements you manipulated to secure convictions against defendants who didn't conform to your vision of community. Records of cases where you pursued enhanced charges against defendants based solely on their identity rather than evidence. The documents landed on the table with a heavy thud. Years of injustice given physical weight, including the case of Marcus Johnson from 2013 when I was your intern and witnessed you bury exculpatory evidence because, in your words, another queer off the streets is a public service. Richard lunged forward, reaching for the documents with desperate hands, but 2 previously anonymous spectators in the gallery rose and blocked his path. They pulled aside their jackets to reveal FBI credentials of their own agents Martinez and Washington, positioned strategically to intervene if necessary. The color drained entirely from Richard's face as he realized the extent of the operation, how completely he had been ensnared by his own prejudice. "This is entrapment," Richard shouted, his carefully maintained facade of professional authority crumbling completely, revealing the desperate man beneath. Spittle flew from his mouth as he pointed an accusing finger at Tyler. "You deliberately provoked me. You came here dressed like that, acting like that. You wanted this reaction." "No, Mr. Simmons, this is justice," Tyler repeated calmly, unmoved by the outburst. "We didn't create your prejudice or your willingness to abuse your authority. We merely documented what you do every day to citizens who lack the protection I have." He turned to Judge Carter, whose shock had transformed into grim understanding. "Your Honor, I request an immediate halt to these proceedings and the implementation of the federal injunction outlined in these documents. This court and the entire Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office will be placed under federal oversight, effective immediately pending our complete investigation." Judge Carter, recovering from her shock, nodded gravely, her judicial authority aligned now with federal mandate. "Granted, Agent Anderson," she took the federal order Tyler handed her, her eyes scanning the document with professional efficiency, her expression hardening as she read the details of Richard's documented misconduct. "This court is now under federal oversight effective immediately. Bailiff, please ensure Simmons does not leave the building. Agents will need to take his statement." The officers who had been so eager to humiliate Tyler minutes before now stood uncertainly, caught between their loyalty to Richard and the undeniable federal authority before them. Their hesitation spoke volumes about the corrupting influence of unchecked power, how it created systems where following orders seemed safer than following justice. In the gallery, Sarah Williams hugged Mason close, whispering in his ear what Tyler couldn't hear but could guess that they were witnessing something historic, a moment when the arc of justice bent toward accountability. Mason's eyes were wide with the realization that heroes sometimes came disguised as victims, that courage wore many faces. True authority doesn't come from intimidation or prejudice, but from upholding the principles of justice that protect every person's dignity. Regardless of who they are or whom they love, power without accountability corrupts those who wield it and harms those subjected to it, creating wounds in the social fabric that take generations to heal. Judge Carter's gavel struck with finality. "Officers Jenkins and Peterson, you will surrender your badges and weapons to the federal agents present. Mr. Simmons, You are relieved of your duties pending a full investigation. Her voice carried the weight of authority long denied to those Richard had persecuted. This court is adjourned until further notice. As federal agents led a protesting Richard away, journalists who had been present began furiously taking notes and photos. What had begun as a routine morning in Montgomery's courthouse would make national headlines by evening. Tyler stood in the center of the now buzzing courtroom, watching as years of systematic discrimination began unraveling. Sarah approached with Mason at her side, her hand extended in professional solidarity. Agent Anderson, Sarah Williams, Alabama Civil Liberties Union. Her smile revealed more than her words. We've been documenting cases for the same investigation. Your approach was unorthodox but effective. Tyler shook her hand warmly. Sometimes you need to experience the injustice to expose it fully. We've been building this case for years, but Richard's public display today was the final piece we needed. Mason looked up at Tyler, eyes wide with admiration. You let them be mean to you so you could catch them. Tyler knelt to Mason's level. Sometimes standing up for what's right means letting people show their true nature first. The hardest battles for justice often require patience. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small rainbow bracelet, similar to his own. This reminds me that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are. He offered it to Mason, who accepted it with reverent hands. I want to be like you when I grow up, Mason said quietly. Tyler smiled. Be better than me, be yourself, and stand up for others who can't stand up for themselves. As Tyler prepared to leave, he turned to address the remaining crowd. Justice isn't a costume we put on when it suits us, he said, his voice clear and strong. It's a commitment we must honor for everyone, or it means nothing for anyone. He paused, letting the words sink in. What happened here today wasn't just about one corrupt prosecutor or one instance of discrimination. It's about recognizing that the law must protect all citizens equally, or it protects none of us truly. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it? What would you be willing to sacrifice to stand up for others? Follow Heart Stories for more tales of courage, justice, and the everyday heroes who change our world, one brave act at a time.